Great Britain, a nation famous for fish and chips, the royal family, Shakespeare and Mr. Bean, but also for world colonization, immigration and these days Brexit. It has got its own unique history. Starting with colonization. The British history of colonization can at first be divided into two parts, 1583 to 1783 and 1783 till 1815, followed by the British imperial century 1815 till 1914, followed by World War I and World War II, and last but not least, decolonization. What you've got to know. Britain started colonization to engage more into the Atlantic slave and worldwide sugar trade. Today's USA and Canada were partially colonized, second of which allowed the British to engage in fur trading as well. Ireland also joined the British Empire by the means of force. Meanwhile, over in today's India and Pakistan, important trade agreements were made through which the English crown gained massive influence. Scotland joined the English crown as well in 1707. So in the early 17th century, Great Britain was the dominating world power, the French not far behind. Further wars and trade agreements in favor of the British secured their position, especially against the French. A massive setback was the American War of Independence, Britain losing its 13 American colonies. Oceania was colonized, first Australia, not much later New Zealand. Meanwhile, again in India, the British East Indian companies traded with the most important Indian goods, not tech support, fabric, spices and tea. Other countries, such as Egypt, Singapore and Iceland, joined the empire as well. Trouble was caused in China, creating the British Hong Kong Island. World War I came around fast, and afterwards the Ottoman Empire was divided, Britain gaining most of it. So in 1921, the British Empire was at its peak. From here on, things went differently. Ireland became independent in 1922. World War II was a British success, but left the empire bankrupt. Political and religious movements in India cost the British their influence in 1947, and India was divided into India and Pakistan, as we know them today. During the Cold War, Britain slowly but steadily lost a number of colonies throughout the years, but it made sure to keep good relations with former colonies. So it came that the Commonwealth of Nations was founded. It's a League of Nations, today linking 2.3 billion people and 52 nations. They have all agreed upon the Hawaii Declarations. All nations have committed to principles such as world peace, opposition to racism, and individual freedom. Decolonization continued. In 1997, Britain lost its last colony, the Hong Kong Island, the end of the empire. Britain has always been a nation of immigration, either peacefully or sometimes through other measures and with different motives. Citizens of many different ethnicities and cultures have come to Britain over the centuries, Romans, Vikings, Normans, or the Indian, to name a few. But whilst the empire crumbled away after World War II, the period known as modern immigration began. Colonization not only brought fame, money and power to Britain, after World War II it was the main cause for immigration. The 1948 British Nationality Act enabled all citizens of the British Commonwealth to legally and without further restrictions to immigrate to Great Britain. Immigrants primarily came from the Indian subcontinent, the Caribbean and Asia. Most immigrants came looking for work and returning after. This fact was taken into account by the British government, and they took the opportunity to fill the hurt British labour market post-World War II. Eager to work but mostly uneducated, the first generation of immigrants to Britain worked in building trade, coal or steel industries, often working in shifts. All of this whilst living together in cheap apartments in poorer inner city areas. From the 1950s to 1961, 30,000 people immigrated into Britain every year. The first generation of immigrants primarily came to earn money which they could send home before returning home themselves, yet many did not return. Thus leading to the second generation of immigrants, children of the before mentioned. This generation faced many problems in society. Often raised by conservative working class parents, they want to outstrive them. Ghettos, racism, or general intolerance, the fact of being torn between two cultures, the cultural heritage on their parents' side, and wanting to be part of the British society and culture on the other side, meant that many may say multiculturalism as a concept has failed. Even though not everyone could integrate and assimilate the British culture, they helped to form British society as we know today. For example, the dish chicken tikka masala, of uncertain origin. It's either Scottish or Indian, but definitely British. It has even been awarded the title A True British Dish in 2001. Up until these days, Britain's position in the European Union has been a contributing factor to immigrations. The EU, as you know, is a political and economic union of European nations. Opening borders is one of the EU's criteria, so that every citizen can pursue a happy life anywhere in Europe. This causes the so-called problem of further immigration, especially in already overcrowded Britain. The cheap Eastern European labour, for example from Poland, is flooding the market. Similar to the situation in the 1950s, the workers live in cheap apartments in inner city areas, close to factories or any work in general. The again seemingly bad immigration politics of Great Britain and British workers complaining due to losing their jobs to cheaper workforce is causing internal unrest, anger and frustration, resulting in a political swing to the right. During the many years in the European Union, some voters in Britain thought leaving was a good idea. For example, the Labour Party in the 1970s and 1980s. Because small-minded people never tend to shut up until they get what they desire, David Cameron promised to hold a referendum if he was voted again in 2015, even though he campaigned to remain in the European Union. Surprise, surprise, in the general elections, the Tories remained victorious and the British got their referendum. The campaigning almost was vile, Brexit in general already being the main topic in the general election before. It now was an all-dominating thing. A common enemy was found for Brexiteers, led by Tories such as Boris Johnson and the right-wing extremists from UKIP, Nigel Farage, in the impenetrable, claimed-as crooked European system. In addition to this, Brexiteers stated that huge sums of money are being paid to the EU, and EU legislations are to be blamed for difficult access to the global market. The set mind of a Brexiteer can very well be seen in the film Brexit the Movie. For the Remainers, Brexit would mean a weaker pound, problems importing products from the EU, and around 3 million jobs at risk in Britain due to them being linked to the European Union. The referendum took place on 26th of June 2016. From this, we learned that the nation is deeply divided. Experts say the results would have been different if younger people would have voted. 48.1% voted for Remain and 51.9% voted for Leave. Noticeable, Scotland, if looked at individually, voted for Remain. Some say this might develop into Scotland leaving Britain to remain in the EU. Furthermore, because of his bitter loss, David Cameron resigned as Prime Minister. Nigel Farage resigned as well, saying he's reached his political goals. With David Cameron gone, who would now become Prime Minister? Well, Theresa May swiftly won the Tory leadership with a year's worth of experience as the Home Secretary and former political successes such as the Snoopers Charter. But she's also known for her U-turns. Her policy of a hard Brexit is a good example, because before the referendum she belonged to the Cameron's rows of Remainers. This brings us to the next part. What does Brexit mean? Britain has to choose between hard or soft. No, not what you are thinking. Hard or soft Brexit. Basically, the degree of separation from the EU, with one keeping most of the trade and border regulations and the other giving up on these. To make Brexit a success, negotiations started in March 2017 and will proceed until March of 2019. A general election was called by the Tories to secure a good position whilst negotiating. This plan backfired badly. The Tories are seen as losers, even though they are the strongest party. They lost their majority and had to resort to a hung parliament, thus weakening their overall position. Only time can tell what exactly is gonna happen to Britain as we know today. And we finished. Britain's history, from a world-dominating superpower to a divided nation, leaving the EU, all while dealing with multiculturalism and immigration. We hope you enjoyed this actually kind of short lesson on some points of British history. Thanks for watching. Take care.